fighting them is very hard because there's a loyalty there. The loyalty does not derive from changeable opinions, but cash. Consider that in the military sense, and cartels have a military power. They have soldiers and so on and so forth. But they're guerrillas. They don't wear uniforms. They don't attack in the normal way. They are merged into the population. And the United States has had a very bad record in fighting guerrilla wars. So the problem of guerrilla warfare is that the enemy is not a conventional force. You can't just look at it. And army troops are very bad at being detectives and do it. And being a detective is very dangerous. And so they are protected partly by the population. They are not simply terrorizing the population, although if you go against them, they will terrorize. But they're also funding many things. So people around them become very dependent on the money. They're not fools. They build loyalty, or at least interest. And penetrating in a guerrilla war is very, very hard. So the idea that we can destroy them as we destroy an army by air power or something like that, you'd have to destroy people who are not in it, a little in it, deeply in it. You really have to understand that the weakness of military force against guerrilla powers in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and so on, okay, Hamas and everybody else, is that they blend into the population. And to root them out, you have to attack the entire population, which then resists, and you're in a situation like you were in Afghanistan or Vietnam or something else. So the idea that if we send in the army, we can knock them out, well, they don't have clear army bases and they don't have capabilities, but they do have the population frequently on their side, or at least afraid not to be. So the only way to really take apart these cartels is to cut off the money supply. So money is a weapon. With money, you can buy people to do things. You can seduce them in various ways. And with money, you can also hire guns to frighten them. Take away the money, and those things decline, not disappear. Once you've built a cartel, is there. But so long as you create a business model for which you can make a huge amount of money, but only if you're a criminal, well, the criminals will be controlling it.
Well, I want to pull on a thread there, actually, because I think you've obviously been referring to guerrilla warfare. You can tie in things like terrorism and ideology there, of course, as well. But I sort of want to figure out if we could talk about, is this an issue that sort of modern states, one of many issues now that modern states are finding really difficult to overcome, that are beyond the sort of state-on-state geopolitics that we might have been used to during the Cold War or before then? You know, you've got things like, for example, here in the UK and Europe, you've got smuggling gangs and migrants coming over and the difficulty with stopping those gangs. You've got non-state groups like ISIS or Hezbollah, if you're looking from the point of view of Israel or the US. And you've got cartels. I mean, do they all sort of fit together? And these are issues that are difficult to solve for traditional states.
Every country has criminals. Every country has lawbreakers. Every country has them organizing in various groups and so on. Okay? The difference between a cartel is the level of money they have available. Okay? So when you look at Hamas, they obviously had a great deal of money available from Iran and other places, and they could do things. But the extent, the relationship between the wealth of the cartels from selling drugs and the wealth of the nation makes them the center of gravity economically. There's no other industry in Mexico, I'll say, or Colombia, that can compete with them monetarily. And therefore, when you're a business model that generates so much excess cash, you can buy into those other industries. So they spread. Guerrilla groups that are ideological do not focus on money. They focus on ideology and trying to persuade people around them to follow them, whether religious ideology or political ideology. And they draw loyalty from them. And sometimes, like Fidel Castro, he was able to overthrow the government of Cuba. But it's a very different dynamic when you're dealing with something that everybody wants, money. When you control that supply of money and they very carefully distribute it, they are not just take it, they distribute it, you build a kind of loyalty that doesn't depend on intellectual desires, doesn't depend on moral desires. You give enough money that they can change their lives. Their loyalty won't be morally based. Their loyalty will be based on self-interest. So particularly in relatively poor countries where criminality always existed in terms of small gangs and so on and so forth, the ability of the cartels to flourish is that they are a source of, if not wealth, well-being to many on the countryside. And fighting them is very hard because there's a loyalty there. In other words, it's not that they hate the cartels. They may not admire them. They may fear them as well. That's another tool they have. But at the same time, their lives are better for it. And that's always been the problem of guerrillas. They promise your lives will be better for it after we win, and in the meantime suffer. With the cartels being essentially a selling model, if you will, you can have your benefits now. So penetrating them is not easy. And once you've identified them, bringing military power to bear is very difficult. And because the loyalty does not derive from changeable opinions, but cash.
For the full episode and much more, go to geopoliticalfutures.com/podcast.